Well, good day, sisters and brothers, and welcome to our reflection for Friday, August 28th. Today is the feast day of St Augustine of Hippo, doctor of the church and bishop. He was born in the year 354 AD in northern Africa. He was a pagan. He was not a Christian to begin with, but over a long period of conversion, he eventually became a Christian, converted to Christianity, and then became a bishop. He is arguably one of the 2 or 3 most important theologians in the entire history of Christianity. So today we thought we would switch up our format for the daily reflections a little bit, and we're going to bring in a very special guest, an expert on the thought of St. Augustine, Eliabeth Bruenig. Eliabeth is a journalist at the New York Times newspaper in New York City, and we are really excited to have you joining us today, Liz.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, first question, can you just tell us a little bit about St. Augustine of Hippo? Who was he?
So Augustine, Augustinus Aurelius was his name. He was born in North Africa, was born to a family that had some status, was not extraordinarily rich, but he was not poor. His father is named Patricius, and his mother, Monica, who's also a saint, was a Berber woman. So she was one of the native peoples of North Africa, and she was a very faithful Christian. Augustine studied rhetoric, and he was a very curious student. He read and read and read and was very fascinated by all of the classic philosophers, Plato, for example, and after his studies concluded, he, was sort of getting work. He was a tutor. During that period of sort of early adulthood, he really loved girls. He spent a lot of time, by his own account, with a legal concubine that he had. This was a very common practice in Rome. He had a son with her. And later on, went to Milan for a job. His mother had arranged him a marriage to a well-to-do girl. And it was at that point that Augustine ended up converting to Christianity. He sent his concubine away. This was heartbreaking for him. It was very difficult. He did not go forward with the arranged marriage. And at that point, somewhere down the line, right, he became a bishop of Hippo in North Africa, and a very prolific writer. He published, I think, 5 million words in his lifetime or something like that, which is really tremendous.
As I said in the introduction, St. Augustine is certainly one of the most important theologians in the 2,000-year history of the Christian church. Top 5, maybe, top 3 even. Can you tell us about his theological legacy? Why is he important? And today, what do Christians today owe to him?
So Augustine is, yes, like you say, he's a doctor of the church. They call him the doctor of grace. And what he was really concerned with is how salvation works. How do people come to God? How are human beings reconciled to God? And he thought quite deeply about this, and he did a few things. He's often credited, let's say, with having invented original sin. He didn't. The idea had been around before him, but he definitely expanded upon the idea of original sin and helped explain what that is and what it means to have a sinful nature, to tend to sin, to be inclined to sin.
Can you tell us in a nutshell, what does the church mean by original sin and grace, and how does Augustine see those two interacting?
Yeah, so original sin is the idea that all people are born with this tendency to error. We are not born with an extraordinary defense, let's say, against wrongdoing. Quite the opposite. Augustine, he didn't necessarily take the Garden of Eden story literally, but he believed that it illustrated the fact that human beings, even in a perfect situation, even in a perfect environment, would still tend to do wrong. that we can do wrong all by ourselves. And that's the idea of original sin. And it's passed down, per Augustine, through the sort of human bloodline. And so thus original sin becomes like this family disease that we all inherit. So how do you work against that is a question for Augustine, because it must be the case that we can choose not to sin at certain junctions, that we have the capacity to choose, because God wouldn't hold it against us if we weren't able to do otherwise. So how is it that we can ever do good? And for Augustine, it's important to say you can't be sinless all on your own, right? Because that would be saying we didn't really need Jesus Christ, that we could have saved ourselves. And Augustine realizes that's not at all the message of the New Testament. So how do you square that circle where Augustine says, God gives us grace, which is this spiritual gift that strengthens us. And you have to seek it. There is, irresistible grace. Sometimes God simply reaches out and touches you and changes your life. And that happens, I think, to all of us from time to time. And it's a wonderful blessing, but you can also and should pray and desire the strength from God, the grace, the spiritual resilience to do good. And you can grow in grace. Augustine says, once you overcome a desire to sin, it's sort of like building up your immune system and you become stronger over time. So you'll never be perfect and you'll always have a tendency to sin, and you'll probably always want to sin, which is in itself a spiritual problem. But Augustine does believe that with the grace of God, it's possible to overcome our tendency to sin.
Awesome. What a great explanation. I know Augustine his thought is very important to you and has been an integral part of your own spiritual journey. Can you tell us a little bit about how he played into your faith journey?
Yeah, Augustine is often credited with having written the first autobiography. So he wrote the Confessions, which survive today and are beautiful. And I would advise anyone to read the Confessions of Augustine. I think when I started reading the Confessions in a class in college, I thought to myself, oh goodness, a book from the 4th century, how relatable and interesting could it be? But it's extremely relatable and interesting, because Augustine, in a certain sense, lived a life that is very recognizable to modern people. He had a kind of wild youth, and he struggled with his desire to please his parents, but his desire likewise to be his own man. And he had definitely liked the ladies. That's something that he struggled with for a while. And he went in and out of different philosophical systems, just seeking the truth. And inside, he was very troubled by the fact that he felt he was just searching. He says he's restless. The great quote given for Augustine is, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you, God." And so he finally does, in the Confessions, convert to Christianity, and there he finds the peace and the rest that he was looking for. So I am an adult convert to Catholicism. I converted to Catholicism when I was in graduate school studying Christian theology, and I felt quite similar. I had been raised Christian. I was raised in a Protestant household as a Methodist, and I really enjoyed my church, and I didn't have any huge problem with it. There was no falling out, but I just felt like I was looking for something more, and that there were questions that the tradition I had been raised in couldn't answer. And the fact that they were left open was strange and troubling to me. And in Augustine, I found not only sort of answers to a lot of theological questions that I had, but also this enormous sense of peace and this idea of grace and the idea that you could ask God to grant you rest and that he would. And for me, he did.
Wow, beautifully put. Elizabeth, thanks so much for talking with us today. We really appreciate the time and just a great introduction to Augustine's thought. If you're interested in learning more about St. Augustine, check out the book that Elizabeth recommended, The Confessions. It's one of the all-time spiritual classics. You can easily get a copy of it on the interwebs. Just Google The Confessions, St. Augustine, or we have a couple hard copies over here at the Jesuit residence too if you'd like to borrow one. Have a great day, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you next week.